An overtake is only really works if you've got somebody who's worth overtaking and there's defense implied. If it's just a guy moving over, oh, my tires have gone off, his tires are 3 laps newer than mine, I've no chance, I'll just move over. That's not an overtake, that's just a place change. It doesn't mean anything. Every division of Formula One has its own story to tell. It's not just the drivers. And if we did that, and if we showed how deep the seam was in Formula One, of brilliance, if you like, then I think we would have a much healthier future. But George had understeer at the same point of the race. So, why weren't the engineers saying, no, George has got a problem too, Lewis, keep going, keep pushing. That's what you needed. And instead of which it was, okay, after you, Claude, and George goes past. It's a sad state of affairs, isn't it? When they can say they're making progress, and yet around Suzuka, one of the best circuits in the world, Lewis Hamilton is blown away by an Aston Martin. What does that tell you?
What's your action? What do you suggest as an action point as far as Mercedes F1 going forward? Hello and welcome to yet again another episode of the F1 Hour with my friend, your friend, the GOAT of all things F1, Mr. Peter D. Windsor. How are you keeping, sir?
I'm very well, mate. Yeah, very good, thank you. Lovely day here in Spain, as ever.
Mate, you look well, Peter. I always want to skip past this part of our conversation lest I delve into green envy about warmer climes because it's super cold over here in the UK. As always, isn't it April by now? Surely it should be warming up, eh?
Yeah, it's almost too hot here already,
Peter. And we're
Turn
so
the
close.
heating off the swimming pool, just go in now, no problem at all.
Peter, stop. Oh, the humanity. Please save us. Go on then, let's talk about some F1 because there is a lot going on. Off the back of the Japanese Grand Prix, Peter, what do you think? What was the biggest story through the lens that you watch your F1?
Well, of course, I'm probably a bit out left field compared with most fans. I love watching the way Red Bull put that 1-2 together. And Max was absolutely perfect from beginning to end. Kind of no surprise, but he was. But I thought Sergio Perez did a really good job. And when you see a team doing that well, and the other driver coming in P2 the way he did, passing cars quite aggressively. I mean, remember, Sergio is not, in my mind, he's never been the greatest of attacking drivers. He's a very good driver in defense, but I wouldn't have said attacking is his greatest strength. But he looked really good, and he looked really positive and very, very confident. Part of that was due to, and I mentioned this at the end of the video on Sunday night, part of that was due to the tire deg situation in Japan. There has been a lot of talk over the last couple of years about how to break up the monotony of a race, wouldn't it be great if the Pirelli tires fell off the cliff even more dramatically and we could mix and match the compounds to the point where there are lots of different strategies and lots of pit stops going on, and everybody sitting back in their director's chairs thinking, well, that'll make racing more interesting. I actually never bought that from day one because it's artificial and contrived from my point of view. As somebody that loves Formula One and has loved it since, I don't know when, a long time ago, I like to see proper things happening for a proper reason. And to me, what we saw in Japan was a little bit proof of my point, because yes, there were a lot of pit stops. Yes, there were quite a lot of overtakes. Yes, there was a lot of tire deg. But what did we see? We just saw these sort of rather basic overtaking maneuvers with not much attempt for defense from the driver who was, the subject of the overtake. And the sort of after you, Claude stuff that we saw, particularly Lando, the way he just sort of let Perez go inside him like that. I mean, this is a podium position we were talking about at the time. And that's what the new Formula One with its tire deg and its tire pit stops and all these different compounds, the way they are, the range of compounds. If that's what it's all about, then do we, to come back to my point, is that what we really want in racing? Yeah, an overtake is only really works if you've got somebody who's worth overtaking and there's defense implied. If it's just a guy moving over, oh, my tires have gone off, his tires are 3 laps newer than mine, I've no chance, I'll just move over. That's not an overtake, that's just a place change. It doesn't mean anything. And so that I thought that race, more than any we've seen so far, brought that home. And beyond that, I thought Carlos Sainz was superb all weekend, qualifying and the race, did everything he should have done in a car and got the maximum from the car. I thought Charles Obviously disappointing in qualifying, did a good job, good catch-up job in the race. But so far as Ferrari spotlight goes, again, it's got to be on Carlos Sainz, who's in this most ridiculous of situations where he's been told he's going to be fired at the end of the year, and he's out there driving, driving his head off, just doing a brilliant job. And somebody at Ferrari must be thinking, what is going on here? Who are we losing? Who are we saying goodbye to? And under that pressure, Carlos is just doing a fabulous job. So I thought that was the other main point.
Go on then, let's talk about Ferrari, because it's all kicking off in the Tifosi, many of whom are in principle Charles Leclerc fans, and argued yesterday that what Ferrari should have done to boost the dwindling confidence of the Monegasque is have a charging Carlos Sainz hold station. What do you make of that, Peter?
Oh, it's complete nonsense. And there's no way Charles would have accepted that either, I don't think. Or Carlos. I mean, even if they told Charles to hold station and Carlos to hold station, I mean, how would they do that? I mean, Carlos was so much quicker at that point of the race, tire-wise. Why? I mean, it just doesn't make any sense at all. And I think you'd have to not know very much about Formula One to even suggest that. I mean, I'm probably a much earlier Charles Leclerc fan than all these Tifosi have now discovered him. And I've always been a fan of Charles, right back to his, just virtually from the day he got out of karting. And I still rate him unbelievably high. I think he's brilliant, but he's definitely got a problem in qualifying at the moment. And he's saying now, oh, it's the way I do the outlap and the temperatures. I don't think it is. I don't think it's something as relatively simple as that, because let's face it, Ferrari would be pretty much on the ball there, and they're getting it right with Carlos Sainz. So why wouldn't they be getting it right with Charles Leclerc? I think it's something more than that. And I think in Melbourne, it was definitely overdriving in Sector 2. Here, I can't say for sure that it was overdriving, but there's something that's going on there in terms of the way he manages the tire in the actual lap, not the build up to it. That is something he needs to look at a little bit. And I think Red Bull have always done a very good job with that. Max, particularly Max working with Adrian. Adrian's got a great feel for when to push and when to shove on that qualifying lap in terms of the tires. And that's what Charles needs to be looking at, I think. But he was really good through Sector 1, which means the uphill S's in qualifying. So Charles Leclerc has still got all the talent in the world. He just needs to get out of this. It's a bit like having the putting yips in golf. He just needs to get out of this business of one lap qualifying and just get the lap time in there and be up there front of the grid where he should be. Then everything will be fine. But as for, no, there's no way they should have had Charles finishing in front of Carlos in that race. No chance.
Yeah, I'd agree with you there. Peter, I wanted to ask you about it. I've been paying particular attention to the variance between Carlos's feedback and the way that he talks and summarises a race or a qualifying session as versus Charles. As an example, Charles in qualifying was doing one of these, right? He was like, I really don't know. When asked, he was like, I don't really know where the performance has gone. Typically, I'm a brilliant qualifier, so I just can't connect the dots. Post-qualifying, in stark contrast, you get something from Carlos Sainz, and he's talking about the race simulations in free practice, that we were quicker as Ferrari than were Red Bull, but I understand if we normalise for fuel, that we potentially were running lighter than that. Like, he's doing this 4D thinking as far as his understanding of what's going on in real time, whereas Charles is just, and this isn't indicative of Charles not knowing, because he's clearly got a decent racing brain, but comparing the two, I think the contrast has never been more than it is now as far as their ability to leverage racing IQ in real time. Agree or disagree, Pete?
No, I agree with you 100%, Cameron, and well observed. And I think what we're seeing there, it's a quantum shift in both directions. We're seeing Charles is under pressure now because he's the chosen one and he's getting beaten by the chosen one. And he's got to start asserting his dominance, obviously. And he doesn't understand, and nor do his garage really understand why he's not getting it together in qualifying. It's a mystery. And at the same time, Carlos is exponentially getting better with every race virtually. And that's really impressive to see. And confidence builds on confidence. And he's got it all together beautifully. And they're going in sort of that direction at the moment. And yeah, it'll come back for sure. Charles will come back and he'll probably end the year dominating Carlos, I suspect. But right now, it's a moment in time when we should really enjoy this, because you're seeing such strength of character from Carlos Sainz, and you're seeing him deliver under pressure in a way that he's taken 4 or 5 years to get to this point, and he's now absolutely right there. Beautiful sweet spot on everything he does, whether it's describing the car, whether it's preparation for the race, whether it's his fitness, whether it's getting over the fact that his trainer left him over the winter, whether it's all sorts of things, and obviously being sacked by Ferrari. And he's using all those actually to be stronger. And we don't see that with human beings, let alone athletes, very often, but it's working. It's happening with Carlos Sainz, and it's something we should really savor. And Charles, Charles is quite an emotional guy, and he's very, very intellectually bright, emotionally and in terms of IQ, but he's definitely an emotional guy. And right now he needs to, he needs to just be very systematic and scientific about the way he goes about his racing, I think, and just try to get all the emotion out of it. I'm not convinced that, for example, I'm not saying this is in any way around, but I mean, it was interesting, Charles coming to Suzuka and thinking about Jules Bianchi and doing the helmet around Jules, which was a really nice thing to see. But I'm not, I can only speak from experience of working with the drivers with whom I have managed and worked over the years. And they just think of themselves over a race weekend. They just totally focused on what they're going to be doing. And to the extent that they're not really interested in anything else that's going on. And I guess I accelerated that in the minds, because I remember as a kid reading about Jimmy Connors, the great American tennis player, who's a little bit of an enigma when he was playing against Borg and McEnroe. It was a loner. And I read an interview with him once, and he said, the first thing I do when I enter a tournament is get my manager to check where all the players are staying. And then I make sure I go to a hotel where none of the players are going to be staying, because I don't want to see their faces. These are the guys I'm going to want to kill on court. I don't want to see their faces in breakfast in the coffee shop. And I thought, wow. And as much as I could, I kind of brought that in with Nigel and with Carlos Reutemann. And I just wonder whether Charles is at the moment, he needs to just be a little bit tougher and a little bit harder and a little bit more into Charles Leclerc, I think. And he needs to win, let's face it, he needs to win the Monaco Grand Prix, doesn't he? And I think Ferrari will be really quick at Monaco this year, really quick. And he needs to make sure he's the guy that crosses the line in front if they're going to win it.
Yeah, absolutely. He needs to rid himself of that Monaco jinx. I'd give Charles credit in that, for once, I've criticised him often in recent weeks about not being as assertive enough with his strategy, because he knows that Ferrari have a cheeky unforced error strategically in them, and for once he was pushing back, right, because they wanted to two-stop, and he was like, well, listen, look where I am in terms of my position on track. Why don't we roll the dice and try a one-stop? So I'll give him some credit in terms of that, but I'm still a bit concerned, Peter, when I hear him saying during quali and free practice, well, why aren't we out? He's still kind of almost a little bit submissive for me as I look from a distance, but hey, he's absolutely got the pace. I suppose if you were going to inbuild into a driver either pace or strategic assertiveness, you would take pace every single day, right? Because you can learn and develop the latter more than you can the former.
Yeah, I think I don't share that necessarily. I don't think Charles any worse or better than other drivers in terms of getting on the radio and saying, why aren't we going out, or why aren't we doing this? But I think what we saw in the race was a classic example of Freddie Vasseur getting everything sorted and good people around Charles, giving him the confidence to be able to just say, right, no, I'm going to go for this long stop and long stint. And that wouldn't have happened, I don't think, under the previous managerial regime. And that's all credit to the people in Charles' garage and to the way Charles is now freed up his ability to be assertive. And that's a very good thing. And having made the decision, there's a double whammy here, because having made the decision, he's then got to make it work. And that's why one of the reasons he drove so well on that long stint. And all credit to everybody there, and obviously to Charles. And that, we shouldn't underplay how well he drove in that stint. It was 25 laps, I think, on the medium, which was a tyre that McLaren didn't like particularly much and didn't use particularly well. Can't really bring Red Bull in here as a litmus test, but certainly it wasn't the flavour of the month tyre for the race. And Charles was just superb on that, and that also shows, doesn't it, how well the car uh, is now developing a sweet spot around which the drivers can manipulate the car. They get a bit of understeer here, they can start to play with the throttle and the steering and get it back again, and they can do the same with the rear, and use all the gizmos as well, obviously. And that's a really positive step, and that really puts into contrast the work that Mercedes didn't do over the winter quite clearly, because what they wanted to achieve was a car exactly where Ferrari are right now, and they didn't pull it off.
Oh, Peter, we'll come on to Mercedes in short order, because I know you'll have something to say about their material underperformance. But you mentioned about tyres. I was a little bit concerned watching quali, hearing the extent to which drivers like Max and Lewis et al. Were talking about them having to manage tyres over the course of a qualifying lap. Now, bringing tyres into their optimal temperature window, that's one thing, right? But I kind of want to see, I remember the days of like Senna in '89 at Monaco. Like, qualifying is has always been the spectacle where you see the symbiosis of man and machine in the pinnacle, like competing to get from A to B in the quickest time possible. Are we losing some of that, Peter, when the best drivers, the best 20 in the world, are having to leverage tyre management over the course of a qualifying lap? Is that a problem?
Well, it's a problem for Charles Leclerc because he's not doing it very well, and it's becoming a new skill that has to be part of the set of any driver. And Max is doing it beautifully, as I say, in harness with Adrian Newey, and is Lewis doing it? I don't know. Maybe it's difficult to tell with Mercedes if they're quick or slow, to be honest. But I think what you're seeing, of course, is a different era. You're seeing the Pirelli monopoly era, and Senna never raced in the Pirelli monopoly era. And yes, there were tires that could do the full lap, obviously, brand new tires, qualifying tires, if you like. These days, Pirelli say they're under a lot of pressure always to produce tires that fall off the cliff very quickly, to produce all these pit stops and strategies, which is what the fans want. Blame the fan surveys that have been carried out over the last 5 or 3 years. I've never been a fan of surveys because I think the answers very often are dependent totally on the way the questions are asked rather than the real fact that you're trying to establish. And yes, apparently the fans have always wanted tires that fall off the cliff. And if you want tires that fall off the cliff, you're going to have tires that aren't going to do a full qualifying lap when they're brand new. So you can't have both.
It feels like a bit of a missed opportunity, but you're right, absolutely. But I don't know, it pains me to see. I want to see these guys be able to push the car out. I really want to see who's fastest in absolute terms.
And we all do, Cameron, we all do. But the only way you're really going to see that now is if we have a second tire company in Formula One. That's not going to happen in the immediate future. So it isn't going to happen. We're going to see more and more, I think, of this managing the tire within the qualifying lap, because of the apparent importance, as I say, of having all these tires collapsing after 15 laps.
That's bonkers, Peter.
It is, but that's where we've gone. You could argue that having to use two compounds in the race is bonkers. You could argue that having to make one pit stop is bonkers. It's all false stuff being thrown on a sport which really doesn't need it if it was appreciated for what it was in the first place. But because Formula One is trying to grow all the time, and it's up there competing with other sports, and it's all about TV ratings and everything else, we bring in all these artificial things to try and make it a bit better.
I don't hate your point, Peter, but I understand also that Liberty Media will now more than ever be conscious of a sport where many of the viewers have come into it via Drive to Survive on the promise of a gangbuster season each and every single time. And I'm conscious as an F1 content creator that the space is contracting as we speak, Peter, that people are cancelling subscriptions to both F1 TV and Sky Sports or their syndicated broadcaster by virtue of the fact that they rock up to every single race weekend and know with a 95% certainty who's going to take the pole and who's going to take 25 points. If you were Liberty Media, Peter, how do you try and solve for that conundrum?
It's a very, very extensive question, difficult question, complicated question. It comes to the heart of what you believe and what you love about the sport. And what I believe is that you don't I've gone through life never really worrying about what other people think. I try and do what I believe is to be correct. And if I've got an opinion, I express it regardless of what other people may or may not be saying. And so any rule, any change that's brought into Formula One based on what we think the fans want, to me, is something to stay away from, because you may be going down a path which isn't good for the sport and isn't pure for the sport. So I'm probably the wrong person to ask in the sense, in the immediate return sense of the word, of wanting to get, profits and expansion of the sport every day. I care more about the sport as a whole, its past, present, and its future. I'm waffling a bit only because I don't think there is an answer anymore. As you began your comment by talking about the Netflix generation. I mean, what does that mean? Does this mean people that like Formula One only because of the drivers? They don't really care about the racing or the technology. They just care about the drivers, and that's what it's all about, and all the gossip. That's what they want. Well, then Formula One should do a better job presenting itself than that, I think. And as I've said several times, I think even in our chats, I think the answer really is for Netflix to be doing the same show about the engineers, about the mechanics, about the motorhomers, about all the aspects of Formula One, the people that go out there looking for sponsorship. Every division of Formula One has its own story to tell. It's not just the drivers. And if we did that, and if we showed how deep the seam was in Formula One, of brilliance, if you like, then I think we would have a much healthier future and a healthier fan base, obviously. What we don't want is a fan base that's there purely because of the glamour of the drivers and not for all the other things that Formula One has worked so hard to achieve over the years. As I keep saying, as I've said many times, Formula One prides itself endlessly on being the cutting edge of technology and having to create its own cars for every team. They're all prototypes. You can't buy a car off the shelf unless you has. And Formula One does very little, having established that. And that's basically built up a nice moat around the castle to stop other race teams coming in, like Andretti. But having established that, they then don't do very much with it. They don't go out and sell that technology. They just hide it all and cover it all up. And it's all incredibly secret. And if the car stops on the circuit, it's a technical problem. We can no longer talk about what the actual problem is. And technology is fascinating. One of the biggest podcasts at the moment is the NASA podcast about what actually happened on Challenger. And obviously all the data's been there for years, but it's coming out and people are fascinated by tiny minutiae of technology. Why aren't we doing that in Formula One? That is the real problem. And we're not. We're only catering for this very sort of glossy, foamy icing on the cake, which is the sort of the gossip area of the drivers, which is not Formula One, in my opinion.
Peter, I will see you that, and I will raise you this. I think you're absolutely onto something, and you know infinitely more about this circumstance than me, given your history as a broadcaster and a world championship winning team manager. But I think I'm in a privileged position here in that I am a part-time casual and a part-time purist, so I can kind of see it from both angles. And I think your channel, Peter, is the case in point, right? Because you have all of the knowledge and understand all of like the technical, like that kind of aspect of F1, but you're also super engaging in the way that you present this information. So in that sense, you're almost like a unicorn of a broadcaster, because you tick both boxes, Peter. So Netflix Drive to Survive generation will come and watch you, and the joke is, Peter, and again, here's where it gets very, very techie. I think in 2024 I think what we're seeing is that I reckon the vast majority of your subscribers and the vast majority of F1 viewers will skip the Grand Prix completely altogether, and instead, because it's optimizing for their time of over the course of a race weekend, instead, why don't I just go and watch the 20-minute Peter Windsor summary? Genuinely, Peter, I think that's what people are going to start doing. It's more add value, it's better entertainment, you speak in a way which is more engaging than will be, 57 laps of a Japanese Grand Prix where Max Verstappen is dominating. And I can reapportion that 2 hours and spend it with family and just catch the Peter Windsor. I think that's the way we're going, Peter, genuinely.
Well, thank you, Cameron. That's not the way. It's not the reason I do it the way I do. I do it because I just think if I hadn't seen that race, what would I like to know about that race and why things happened? As you say, perhaps not sitting down for 1 hour and 40 minutes to watch the Grand Prix. But it's kind of sad to hear that, because I enjoyed watching the race yesterday. I enjoyed every lap. I was measuring the gap between Max and Perez. I was measuring the Ferrari gaps. I was looking at Lando's lap times when he was behind Leclerc, and that was a really interesting face-off as well. But you have to look at the lap times, because the cameraman, the director, wasn't following it. To me, that Leclerc Lando Norris moment, when they both came out on exactly the same lap, brand new sets of hard tires, really interesting comparison, head on. They were only like 1.3 seconds behind, I think, Lando. And that was, Ferrari versus McLaren, the best of Ferrari versus the best of McLaren. How are they going to go? And Charles was just fabulous. And he just pulled away from Lando incrementally and beat him. And that was quite significant. But the problem is the director isn't going to be focusing on that. Oh, no, there's a battle going down with Magnussen and Tsunoda. We better go and see that. Place change for 14th. Let's go and look at that. And it's all too gossamer. It's all too lightweight, I think. And there's not enough depth of understanding, if that's the right word, of what we're really looking at. Because that was a really interesting battle yesterday. I thought that Leclerc-Norris battle, really interesting. And it would have been lovely to have seen exactly where Charles was pulling away from him and how they compared with top speeds. He could have brought up lots of really nice graphics at that moment as a direct comparison. All the gloves are off. Forget about fuel tank runs in FP3 when nobody's sure about fuel load. Forget about all the other elements that come into the build up to the race. This was it. They were both racing. They both on the same set of tires in terms of life. Let's go for it. And the whole opportunity was missed on TV. But I watched it all in terms of numbers, and it was captivating in terms of the data, I thought.
So then you're bridging the gap, are you not, Peter, between you're almost an F1 translator of sorts, where the broadcaster aren't giving you this rich tapestry of what's going on in real time as far as the Japanese Grand Prix, Lando and Charles. You're on YouTube and you're plugging the gap. Here, this is what they told you saw, but here's what it really was. This is the how and the why, and I think that's why your channel's going to do gangbusters, Peter, over the next couple of years.
Thank you very much, Cameron. Yeah, it's not easy because we don't have access. Probably in our industry, and I know you feel it as well. I mean, there are a few people out there that do break all the rules and they put up stuff from live TV, and they photograph the pictures on TV and put them on their YouTube channel. Yeah. They don't last up there for long, but there's a lot of people out there who've got quite a lot of subscribers through breaking all the laws. But if you do it well and you just talk into the camera and you use the very good still images that the teams put out and Pirelli put out, you can do half a job. And it's interesting to note from what you're saying that there are gaps there that need to be plugged between the live coverage and understanding what the race was all about.
Yeah, very many gaps that need to be plugged, Peter. Speaking of gaps that need to be plugged, shall we talk about the guys and girls at Brackley and Brixworth being Mercedes? Because I don't know their PR at the moment, but put aside their performance on track for a second, Peter, but I feel like I get the impression that they don't know where or who they are at the moment. Toto's come out and said that, okay, ignore the 7th and the 9th, the underlying performance is getting better. But when you look at the numbers, they were 46 seconds adrift in 2024 at Suzuka. In 2023, it was 49 seconds. In 2022, it was 40 seconds. So what he's saying doesn't tally with the underlying evidence. Peter, if you are at the next annual general meeting at Mercedes or Daimler AG, what's your action? What do you suggest as an action point as far as Mercedes F1 going forward?
We've all got suggestions we can make in terms of the AGM or the monthly or the quarterly meeting that they have. I'm not sure what Toto will have sold them anyway. He's probably sold them the concept that after years of winning and not getting much TV because the cameras think it's boring to see the Mercedes dominating every race, now we got lots of TV coverage because everybody's concerned about why Mercedes aren't winning, and we're actually getting more value for money than ever before. So we better not go down that path in terms of what he says to the board. But in terms of how to improve things at Mercedes, I don't know. I really, I know of at least one really, really good Formula One engineer who would love to work for Mercedes, who's got a lot to bring in terms of bouncing and managing the car and aerodynamics, who's available. And I wrote to Toto about him and said, this guy's available. He'd love to talk. I'll put you in touch directly if you'd like to do it. Didn't even get a reply. So I don't know. They're not listening at the moment, as far as I'm concerned. That's all I can say. And beyond that, it's a sad state of affairs, isn't it? When they can say they're making progress, and yet around Suzuka, one of the best circuits in the world, Lewis Hamilton is blown away by an Aston Martin. You know, what does that tell you? This is the Mercedes factory team we're talking about. We're not talking about Lewis in an uncompetitive team. I know it's a dodgy car now, but it's an uncompetitive. And this is Lewis, who on a Friday was saying the car feels pretty good. It's the best it's felt all year. Quite easy to manage it and balance it. Really enjoying myself out there. You know, it's just ridiculous how little grasp they seem to have as the weekend progresses and where they're going with the car. And it looked to me, I can only do it from the data. It looked to me like they were too quick on the straight relative to where they are with their opposition, with McLaren, Aston Martin, and a few others as well. And I think it seemed like they weren't running enough downforce and they didn't have enough grip during the race to manage the tires well enough. But they will say, well, what the hell would Windsor know about it just looking at the data? But if we don't have anything else to look at, that's all we can look at. They're the ones with all the data and they're not doing much with it either, are they? So it's very difficult, really, to be saying anything other than the obvious, which is that they don't seem to be doing a very good job. They haven't done a very good job over the winter of giving themselves more downforce and sacrificing some top speed and giving themselves a sweet spot that Ferrari have obviously created and McLaren to some extent. And they don't seem to be doing a very good job of adapting now to what they're seeing going on around them at Ferrari, or indeed in setting this car up for the race the way it is. I mean, two unbelievably quick drivers, very, very high talent level there, George and Lewis. And yet, as I say, George struggling to beat Oscar Piastri, let alone Fernando, and Lewis couldn't do either.
Unbelievable.
He beat Yuki Tsunoda. Okay, give him that.
I mean,
it's just terrible, isn't it, really?
That's the benchmark now, Peter. I mean, no, it's bonkers. It is bonkers.
Yeah.
I suppose as a Lewis fan, I'm more concerned, not just about the lack of pace of the car, but the lack of direction, right? Is Toto going to attend the Grand Prix or is he not? Initially, he's saying that he's not going to attend in person because he wants to work from home and he's got scheduling difficulties. And then he's saying that he's going to rock up. Yeah, exactly, Peter. Yeah, we'll talk. And then Lewis says, like you said, in free practice, the car feels good. It's the best ever this season. And then all of a sudden, that performance just disappears in qualifying owing to a change in temp. I'm rereading the Adrian Newey book, How to Build a Car. And he talks extensively for chapters upon chapters about the importance in ground effect of building a car that's not sensitive to changes, right? Whether that's changes in temp or changes in yaw or type, whatever the case may be. And I'm struggling, Peter, to understand how the 8-time constructors in Mercedes haven't grasped this yet, that the foundation, the building blocks of any quick car in ground effect era is to build a chassis that's malleable and not sensitive to all these other bits. Forget about the high peaky performance curve, and still it looks like they're hung up on that like nearly 3 years later, Peter. It's honestly, the mind boggles. I just don't understand.
And I think you've hit the nail on the head talking about the building blocks, because in reality, the building blocks on which they are basing this 2024 car are a bit shaky. They go back to 2022 and it wasn't a good car. And so because they didn't very quickly, having made that error with the 22 car, halfway through the year, just say, right, back to square one, clean sheet of paper, let's get decent people into the team who understand what bouncing and ground effect is all about, and we'll start again for 2023. Because they didn't do that, and they kept trying to develop that car on the basis that we've won all these world championships, we must know what we're doing. The building blocks on which we are still operating today in 2024 are pretty rocky, and that's the problem. Whereas Red Bull's building blocks are absolutely rock solid, and so it goes back not only to the initial error on the 22 car, but on the error of not then taking the medicine and starting again from scratch. It goes back to that. And so far as the drivers go, it's Lewis odd in the race, sort of acquiescing early on to George. And then George, very unlike George, I thought, in the race as well. I mean, what was that business of trying to go inside Piastri at the chicane all about when he's got a DRS zone immediately afterwards? And he could easily have got him DRS that lap. And he might even then have had a chance to get Fernando. But it was all sort of panic. Oh, there's a gap, got to go for it. And that was a bit unlike George, I thought. And so the whole thing looks like it's this, everybody's on edge at the moment and nobody's really on top of what should be happening.
Yeah, I think there are a lot of threads at which we need to pull here, Peter. Let's talk about Lewis very quickly first, because again, he said that the reason in real time, I'm completely baffled, Peter. I'm like, who is this? Who is this driver masquerading as Lewis Hamilton, who's acquiescing without argument or resilience to George Russell mid-race, knowing all the while that they're on the same strategy? Okay, so after the fact, we come to learn that he had damage on his front right portion of his front wing, and he'd incurred that via a cheeky love kiss between him and Charles Leclerc. But nevertheless, even that notwithstanding, Peter, I'm finding that I think Lewis, you alluded to it the last time we talked. I think Lewis is on gardening leave in his mind, that he's just on sabbatical. Why risk my life in a car that's not worthy? I'll just chill out for 12 months and then crack on when in 25 when I've got a decent car, right?
Yeah, I mean, I did say that before the season started. Not quite that way. I said that if the car is good and he's got balance and grip, he'll be right there and he'll be the same Lewis Hamilton. But if he's got iffy things like high-speed flick oversteer or chronic understeer and graining, he's not going to be enjoying the day very much, and he's probably going to back away a little bit and think about the red cars. And I think, but I was surprised that we saw that so obviously in Japan, because it's very early in the season, and it wasn't as if he'd had a bad weekend at that point. He'd done well to out-qualify George, and yes, he had understeer, but George had understeer at the same point of the race. So, why weren't the engineers saying, no, George has got a problem too, Lewis, keep going, keep pushing. That's what you needed. And instead of which it was, okay, after you, Claude, and George goes past. And then interestingly, when he's talking after the race about all that, he's doing it with a smile. I thought that was really interesting, because normally if he's ever been subjected to team orders, not that it happens very often, but he has been in the past occasionally, he's never been happy about it. And here he is sort of saying, oh, well, a bit of a lot of understeer, and I thought it'd be better to let George go through. It's almost like, well, you wanted George, you can have him now, sort of thing. And it's all, there was a little bit of that in it, I think. But it's not a good thing. I've banged on a lot about how the minute Daniel Ricciardo walked out of Red Bull because he didn't want to get beaten by Max on a regular basis, even though he could still have won races alongside Max, quite obviously. But even though he then said, right, I don't want to drive for the best team in Formula One, I'm going to drive for a mid-range team and make lots of money because it's going to be better for me. The minute he did that, he kind of sold his soul. And if Lewis doesn't remain razor sharp this year, it's going to be quite difficult for him to get into a Ferrari and be at least the Lewis Hamilton that we knew from, say, 4 years ago, which obviously is what he's hoping will happen. A little bit like Seb Vettel, I think, when he went there. Yes, he can go there and he can say, well, of course, Charles is going to be quicker because he knows the team, he knows this, he knows that, and I'm going to take my time and I'm going to enjoy my life. Of course, he can do that. But the problem with that is actually being really quick when you need to be when the car is good. And he just needs to make sure he keeps that edge there. I'm sure he will, and he'll probably look back at Suzuka and think, nah, I'm not going to do that again. Probably, I'm only putting words into his mouth, but he probably will think that way, and he'll probably come back in China, and he'll be mega there. Interesting thinking about China. The last time we raced there, Valtteri was on the pole. Can you believe that? In the Merc, Lewis won the race, didn't he? But good old Valtteri.
He's hoping with Lewis. I hope you're onto something, Peter. But again, if we're referencing high level sports, it's 9 times out of 10. It's a cumulative learning curve, right? And F1 in particular it's not a light switch. It's one of those that if you turn it off, it's really, really hard to flick back on. And again, I suppose Alonso's managed to do it. He came out of the sport and came back into decent success. But again, 9 times out of 10.
Very different situation though, because he left the sport right at the top, and then he took a year off, and then he came back knowing he was going to be number one driver of a potential championship winning car. A very different situation to Lewis sort of making the decision himself at a time when the car's not going very well at Merc to go to Ferrari, with Charles there, who's really good. Yeah, it's a different situation, very different. And that's why he needs to keep sharp now. He probably will, because the more relaxed he is, you could argue, the better he will drive when things are good. It's just when things aren't going well, as we keep saying, as you and I have both agreed, he isn't going to be out there pushing it as hard as he needs to. And sometimes you need to do that to remain sharp, I think. But yeah.
I would agree with you. One of my commenters said the other day that you don't see how good a seaman you are in calm waters. That you need to be in a storm, right?
That's right. The Max we're seeing now is the Max that was finishing 4th, 5th, and 6th when Red Bull weren't winning races, and it was those years that made Max the driver he is now. The reason Nigel Mansell was able to dominate when he got into a quick car because of all those races he drove for Lotus when he finished 8th and 9th, and nobody was watching. It's those races that matter.
Yeah, absolutely. Where you learn most. Just talk about George Russell very quickly, because I'm starting to see, as brilliant as he is, Peter, I'm starting to see a bit of a pattern as far as I've said. The metaphor that I've leveraged is that in the latter stages of a race, if there is an overtake that's on, that George doesn't have the maturity yet to almost chew his food before he swallows. He gets a bit eager, right, and doesn't set the overtaking manoeuvre up as the great ones would do. I don't know, an Alonso on Checo in 2023 or a Lewis on Max in Brazil in 2021. He kind of he just wants to get it done, as he's done in Singapore last year, latter stages of a race, a podium in the offing. Similarly, Australia, he's gotten caught out by Fernando Alonso in the non-brake test or whatever you want to call it. And now at Japan, a very clumsy, it's almost like he's on a Gran Turismo or something, right? A game, and he's just.
What about Imola with Bottas?
Same sort of thing, right? He's seen something and he just wants to grab at it, like he doesn't.
Without looking at how wet it was offline, and I don't know. Yeah, I don't know if it's a late race pattern of George. There seems to be that evidence. It's difficult to understand why it would happen towards the end of the race rather than middle or the beginning of the race. But there's certainly something that's a bit spiky about George's mental approach. I know we don't use telemetry to monitor the mental thoughts of anyone, but if you could, it would seem that although Max, when you watch his head movement in the car, when he's coming out of the pits, for example, you see him moving, he's quite staccato in everything he does. And that's because he's just completely isolating everything else in his life other than just what's happening around him. And so, right, let's get on with it. But when he's on it, everything is fingertip and gentle and beautiful and smooth and lovely to watch. Whereas with George, it's the same thing. It's quite staccato. But it's actually quite staccato in the car as well. And that's the difference between the two. And I think George, when he applies that to traffic situations, is very spiky as well. And that's why we see that. As I say, I can't really understand why that would be worse or better towards the end of a race. But I just found that whole business with Piastri extraordinary, with the DRS following the chicane like that. And we all know going into the chicane that there is absolutely no way in the world you can actually overtake there unless the guy does go right off track. These current Formula One cars are too big. All you can do is go around side by side, and then you'd have to fall behind Piastri anyway. Yeah, there was a gap. The reason Oscar left the gap is because there's no way you can overtake there anyway. but he could easily have got the draft down the DRS, and that's just, I just don't get that. Why he didn't do that. And I don't know. What we saw in Australia was very odd. And I've done a video about it. I mean, this admission that he was looking down at the dash instead of at the back of Fernando's car, or whatever he should have been looking at, something in front of Fernando's car. And he was actually looking down, and he's only half a second behind Fernando at 250 kilometers an hour, approaching a quick corner. And he's looking down at the dash and looks up and suddenly realizes Fernando's slowed a bit earlier than normal. Well, as he's entitled to do if he wants to. So surely, the guy to blame there is probably George for not watching where he's going. And that's a weird thing too, isn't it?
Just a bit.
And I extrapolated in that one, saying, I'm surprised that when they're playing with all these toggles, that they do have to look down physically. You would imagine that with the engineers, they're working with enough ergometrics to be able to make the changes really without taking your eyes off the road. You would imagine. I would anyway. I would imagine that's why they're placed the way they are, the sizes the way they are. Some of them, obviously, the dash, you got to look down. But generally speaking, you would imagine you wouldn't have to take your eyes off the road. But they obviously do. Well, George does anyway. And that's what caused the accident.
So it's a bit dangerous, that, Peter.
Well, yeah, and I wonder whether head-up displays might be the thing that we should have as a result, because if that is the cause of that accident, which George has basically admitted to be the case, then we should be looking at something like head-up displays.
Yeah, I agree, and I think they are looking at them, right. I read an article, I want to say 12 months ago, that said,
but it still doesn't solve the problem.
Expensive.
If the head-up display says, right, go to position 5 of the toggle of the switch, 3 to the left of that one, you've still got to look down. I think we need to get rid of half the switches on the steering wheel, to be honest, because there are some there, obviously, quite clearly, you wouldn't be able to adjust unless you were looking at it.
Yeah, fair. Although I suppose it's incumbent on the driver to have 90% of the buttons, almost the positions of the buttons, memorized to where, do you know what I mean? They should be able to toggle.
Yeah, that's what you would imagine. That's what they should be doing in a sim, in all the sim practice they do, you would imagine. But as I say, quite clearly not, because otherwise George wouldn't have had the accident.
Yeah.
It's a little bit, I'd love to see a team run a driver in a race without any switches at all on the steering wheel and just see actually what difference it makes to the race. I'd love to see that. It's a bit like, doing 18 holes of golf with a 7-iron, a sand wedge, and a putter, and just see what score a pro would shoot with only 3 clubs. I bet you would be shocked at how well they'd do.
Yeah, it's a fair test.
A lot of the natural thing, I've got to understeer here. Yeah, I just need to feel how I'm going to do that coming out of the brakes a little bit more gently, or whatever it is. A lot more creativity would come into it. Okay, Absolutely. You can have the radio maybe, but that's about it. Take everything else off and just see how it compares.
Law of diminishing returns, sometimes, Peter, perceived benefit that doesn't stack up in reality. As we round third base then, Peter, let's talk about driver silly season, because I read an article that said recently that the bottleneck in all of these moving parts is one, Max Verstappen, and that as soon as he makes his decision whether he's going to stay or go to Aston or potentially go to Mercedes, all the other bits will kind of all the other bits of the driver silly season jigsaw puzzle will kind of slot in place. Talk to me then about Carlos Sainz. I asked you this question before, but again, things have changed between now and then. If you are Carlos Sainz's management, which one of those teams are you trying to sandwich Carlos's place into most?
Well, I think the premise of everything being based around Max is wrong. I think everything is based around Adrian Newey, and Max will make a decision based on whether Adrian Newey stays at Red Bull or maybe goes somewhere else, which I don't think he will. And I think he will stay at Red Bull. So I think Max will stay at Red Bull. That's my gut feeling, but I may be wrong. But that's what I think is the case. So forget about Max. It's all about Adrian. Where Adrian is, Max will be, and vice versa, actually.
Yeah.
And if on the basis that Max does stay at Red Bull with Adrian, yes, maybe Red Bull might decide to replace Sergio with Carlos for 1 year, but then they've lost they've lost Sergio basically, and would they do that for 1 year? It just doesn't make any sense, does it? Would they do it permanently? Maybe, but would Carlos be better off? Well, it'd be a difficult time for Carlos, wouldn't it? He'd win 1 or 2 races, maybe a bit like Perez, maybe 1 more per season than Perez, but. it's not a great thing to be alongside Max. On the other hand, your management might say, well, Max isn't going to be there forever. Let's get into Red Bull again. And they want you. It's the best option. You can't go to Audi because the Sauber's uncompetitive at the moment. You don't want to waste a year in 25 in the Sauber. What else is there? So you do that, I guess. But it's a big ask for Red Bull to get rid of Sergio Perez because he's doing a very good job. He's bringing money to the team. He knows how to play his part now. He knows his place, if you like. It's, just to fire him for no reason other than you want to put Carlos Sainz in the car. When you've got Max in the other car, that's the point. Then I just don't think they'll do that. Oof. I think Sergio's driving. I mean, as much as I've been going on about how well Carlos is driving under pressure, Sergio Perez is driving well under pressure. He knows his drive potentially is on the line as well, and he's doing a really good job. Yeah. So, and he could win a race or two in the next 4 or 5 races, couldn't he? He's not slow around Baku or Monaco, that's for sure.
That's a good shout.
Good so difficult. And if you're Carlos's management, you say, well, we'll put Red Bull to one side then because they may or may not offer him the drive depending on what they want to do with Perez. And then where do you go? It's very frustrating. They could offer him 1 year at Mercedes before they sign the great Kimi. Or they might even race the great Kimi next year if he's going to be in a Williams at Monza, as they say. And so that doesn't leave anything other than Audi for Carlos, which is bad for Formula One because Carlos Sainz is doing a really good job and he's got a great profile for Formula One. I think for fans out there, he's a great guy. He's well mannered. He's polite. He's presentable. He's cool. He looks like a racing driver. He's everything you want it to be. And it'll be a shame to see him midfielding in a Sauber next year if that's what they have to do. And it's just, as I said in the last time we spoke, there's just something that's not right about any of this. It's all out of sync and it's out of whack, and it shouldn't be happening really. The guy as good as Carlos Sainz should not be losing his Ferrari drive at the end of the year. Simple as that.
Completely agree. And I suspect that that's what's causing the hold up, that with his new vein of form, Carlos Sainz doesn't want to put himself in a Sauber that can't even change tyres for one season, right? Audi kick in at 2026, but would Carlos Sainz want to be in there 12 months before that? Probably not, eh?
No, I don't think he would.
Nah.
And he's quite right not to. And it won't do much for his driving and his confidence either to be in a midfield car.
Absolutely.
As we've just been saying about Lewis, if he's driving this well now, he wants to continue driving this well. And the best place for him to be is Ferrari alongside Charles Leclerc. Yeah. Great team for Ferrari. I still find it astonishing that they're changing it.
It's bonkers.
It's a bit like Daniel leaving the best team in Formula One because he doesn't like getting beaten by Max. It's a bit like, you got something good, you don't change it. And the same with Ferrari. They got a very good setup right now, very good team. Don't change it.
Yeah.
Too late to say that, of course, because they are. But I don't know why they're doing this. I really don't. If Lewis doesn't need... you can't blame Lewis. It's a perfect way for him to end his career. It's perfect for Lewis. But I'm not sure it's perfect for Ferrari.
If it's not broke, don't fix it, Peter. Blimey, it's going to be interesting.
Well, that's absolutely right. There's a lot of things wrong at Ferrari, which they're gradually fixing, and they fixed quite a lot of them. They're still not in Red Bull territory yet in terms of the amount of downforce they can run and have Red Bull's top speed. But they may well achieve that by Monza. Let's wait and see. It'd be interesting when they get to another quick circuit.
Oh, the F1 world watches and waits with bated breath. Peter, you've been super generous with your time. Thank you so much as always.
Thank you
if
very
you want
much,
to get
Cameron.
more of the Goat in all of F1, you can catch him on all good podcasting platforms. The Short Corners podcast, absolutely ridiculous. Peter Windsor YouTube, and at Twitter or X at Peter D Windsor. If you're watching this on YouTube, be sure to drop a like, comment and subscribe. If you are listening on a podcasting platform, be sure to follow and 5-star rating because we appreciate it. Between now and next time, as always, remember to look but never stare.